last month we had a wonderful presentation on the geology of the moon and the mapping of the moon for the Artemis landing. That was really pretty cool. And tonight we have someone who has a Tallahassee connection. Dr. Luna last month actually grew up in Tallahassee and went elsewhere. And now we have someone who comes from far away and is here in Tallahassee with us now. So I hope that she tells us a little bit about her journey from growing up in Brazil to landing in Tallahassee. So you've seen a few slides of the Tallahassee Scientific Society activities and information. And our mission is really to promote scientific literacy in our community. If you'd like to know more about it, please go to our website, tallysci.org. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Mariana Fuentes, who graciously accepted the invitation to speak to us tonight. Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you so much, Carrie. It is a pleasure to be here today presenting. Thank you all for joining me. So today I'll take you through a journey and explain some of the challenges and opportunities that sea turtles are facing in a changing world. And I'll be doing this by providing some examples from my own research. But before I start, I do want to provide a little bit of information on my own journey. Is this working?
Yes, closer to your
Is
mic.
this working? Hello? Can you put it louder? Is this better?
Hold it
I'll
closer to
start
your mouth.
again because I guess folks couldn't hear me in the back. So thank you so much for being here today. It is a pleasure to be able to present on my research. So today I will take you through a journey and I'll talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that sea turtles are facing in a changing world. And I'll do this by providing some examples from my research. But before I start, I wanted to provide a little bit of information on my own journey on how I started working with sea turtles and how I was inspired to provide science-based solutions to the conservation and management of turtles. So my journey with sea turtles started about 25 years ago as an undergraduate student. And during this time, even though I wasn't taking my undergraduate studies in Australia, I was able to work at two different not-for-profit organizations that worked with the conservation of sea turtles. So I started working at Projeto Tamar in Brazil, which is one of the main agencies that protects and conserves sea turtles in Brazil. And I started as an environmental educator at their visitor center. And then during my undergraduate program, I worked with the Indo-Pacific Sea Turtle Conservation Group in Australia. And this is when I started working with nesting turtles. So during this time, I was very fortunate, and I actually spent my 18th birthday in one of the islands out in the Coral Sea working with green turtles. So for me, that's how it all started. So after that, I undertook my research program, or my honors, looking at the foraging ecology of green turtles, and I worked in the Great Barrier Reef. And this was actually the first time that the outputs from my research were used to inform the conservation and management of sea turtles. So in this case, I was interested in identifying areas that were important for sea turtles across an island, and those areas were later used to inform areas to be protected in this region. So this experience actually provided me starting point to conducting applied science. So from there, I had the opportunity to move to Barbados, where I started working with the West Indies University and the Barbados Sea Turtle Project. And this is when I started working with hawksbill turtles. And unfortunately, this is when I saw firsthand how coastal development, poaching, and pollution impacted sea turtles. So then I was determined to continue my research and continue to help the management and conservation of sea turtles. And I started a PhD degree at James Cook University in Australia. And for my research, I looked at the impacts of climate change on sea turtles. And during this time, I was actually very fortunate to work at remote islands and I worked in the Torres Strait, which are islands between the northern top of Australia and Papua New Guinea. So I worked with indigenous communities, and in Australia, indigenous communities can still legally hunt and harvest turtles. So my goal was to teach them about sustainable hunting and to let them know that their resources would change as climate change progresses. So the outputs of my research helped inform the conservation and management of sea turtles and to identify how populations would change in a changing climate. So after that, after I got my PhD, I worked at the Australian Research Centre for Coral Reef Studies, also in Australia. And this time I was working with a conservation planning group. And again, I worked with indigenous communities, and this time I worked in Cape York, which is the western northern point, don't know if you can see here, of Australia. And the whole idea behind this work was to develop a framework that could help us prioritize resources. So basically we wanted to prioritize resources to maximize the conservation of flatback turtles, which are endemic to Australia. So the outputs, again, from this research was very useful in informing how indigenous communities could best use the resources that they have to maximize the conservation of sea turtles. And during this process, I was able to identify different interventions and conservation initiatives that would help them maintain the population of turtles in their nesting grounds. So now, 10 years ago, I moved to Tallahassee, and I'm based at Florida State University. And when I started at FSU, I was eager to develop a research program that provides science-based solutions for the management of sea turtles. So now 10 years later, I lead the Marine Turtle Research Ecology and Conservation Group, and most of the projects that we are conducting are identifying and quantifying threats to sea turtles and providing science-based solutions for their management. So today I will take you through a journey to understand some of the impacts that sea turtles are currently facing and describing some of the ways that we're helping with our research and some of the ways that you can also help. So I just also wanted to highlight here some of my students and some of my group, and without them, none of this research would be possible. All the work that we do is very field intensive, so we need a lot of people to help and support us. So before we start with this presentation, I just wanted to take a moment and ask everyone to channel their inner sea turtle. I want you to imagine that you are a swimming sea turtle in this pristine foraging area with extensive seagrass beds and coral reefs. The water is clean, free of pollutants, and provides just the right environment for you to thrive. So as you swim in your foraging ground, you suddenly realize that your reality has changed. You now have all these boats in the area that we used to be pristine, and you have to avoid being hit by vessels. The pristine seagrass beds are now damaged by boat anchors, and you are too stressed to forage. So unfortunately, places like this one are not uncommon in the southeast United States, especially in places that are also used by sea turtles. So I don't know if anyone can recognize where this photo was taken. It wasn't taken far from here. It was taken in Destin. I don't know if you guys know what they call, I forgot the name. They have a sandbar where it attracts, it attracts hundreds of boaters to this region, particularly during spring break. But this is also an area very important for sea turtles. So unfortunately, an increase in the number of recreational boaters in coastal areas means that encounters between turtles and vessels are becoming more common. So here I wanted to show this footage to you guys of an opportunistic video that I took from a drone, and you can see this really close call between a turtle and a vessel. So fortunately, no one is hurt during this video, but this just highlights how common these interactions are, especially during the time of the years that turtles are foraging and when boaters are attracted to this region. So we know that interactions like this can result in sea turtles being killed or severely injured from the collisions with vessels. Indeed, we know that between 2010 and 2022, over 6,000 turtles were stranded with vessel strike injuries in Florida. We also anticipate that interactions between turtles and vessels will impact their energy expenditure, will cause changes to their foraging ecology, and this will result in displacement of sea turtles. And this can eventually also affect their growth rates and eventually their reproductive output. So to mitigate the impacts of vessel strike on sea turtles, we're actually working to determine what factors affect the risk of sea turtles to vessel strike. And we're actually working in 3 locations as identifying this map. So if you look at the regions circled in red, we have Destin, St. Pete, and Sarasota. And those areas were selected because they were identified by Florida Wildlife Commission as having clusters of stranded sea turtles with vessel strike. So for this project, we're conducting systematic surveys in a boat and flying the drone concurrently. And the idea here is to get a better understanding of the spatial distribution of turtles and vessels. We're also in collecting information on the speed of boaters to get a better sense of whether boaters are complying to speed regulations. And ultimately, we want to have a map like this one that shows areas that sea turtles are more likely to be exposed to boats. And also we want to identify what are the factors that are affecting the risk or the probability of turtles being hit by vessels. So we're still on the 2nd year of this project, but next year we'll also start an education campaign in each of the locations, and hopefully we're going to see a change in the behavior of the boaters, and we will also hopefully see a reduction in the number of turtles that are stranded with vessel strike injuries. So to better understand the impacts of vessel strike on sea turtles, we're also interested in understanding the non-lethal impacts of vessel interactions on turtles. So to address this question, we have been working Crystal River in the Panhandle. And for those of you that are familiar with Crystal River, you know that it supports a recreational scallop fishery during the summer months. So the footage that I showed of that vessel almost hitting a turtle was actually taken in Crystal River. So Crystal River is also important for green, loggerhead, and Kemp's Ridley turtles. And particularly in the summer months when we have the recreational scallop fisheries, we also have turtles utilizing this area. So basically here, we want to understand how this vessel presence impacts sea turtle energy expenditure, foraging activities, and their spatial distribution. So some of the earlier work that we conducted at Crystal River involved putting a satellite tag on the back of turtles. So basically this is a device that sends us a signal to where the turtles are so we can look at their movement. We also conducted surveys on our boats to identify sea turtles and also boaters, and we identify areas that were more heavily used by boaters. So I don't know if you can see this image, but basically on panel A here, we have the spatial distribution of turtles during and before the scallop season. So in blue, we have the spatial distribution of turtles before the scallop season, and in orange, we have during the scallop season. So you can see that during the scallop season, turtles are using a bigger area, right? And then if you look at panel B, where we have the gray scale of white to dark, those are the density of boats. So basically, turtles are expanding their distribution to areas that have less boat. So they're obviously trying to get away from the boat. Makes sense, right? So in order to capture some of the interactions between turtles and vessels, and to better understand how turtles are responding to the presence of vessels, we started deploying cameras on sea turtles, like this one here. So this is basically a very fancy GoPro, which allows us to record footage of sea turtles for 3 hours. So basically we get to see what turtles are seeing. And after 3 hours, our attachment corrodes and the camera pops up, and then we can find that camera and then we can retrieve the footage. So to date, we have made 29 deployments with the Paralens cameras, and we have deployed the cameras on loggerheads, camps, and gray turtles. So the cameras allowed us to obtain insights into the behavior, the foraging ecology, and also more information on how turtles are interacting with other turtles. So this video here is from a deployment that we put on a Camps turtle, and basically you can see it's selecting some food items, and it's providing us some information on how turtles are foraging. The bottom footage here is from a loggerhead turtle, and you can see that this turtle forages in a very different way. So this turtle is looking for crabs and mollusks. So this has provided us really valuable information on how turtles are behaving when we're not looking at them. We also have been able to obtain information on how turtles interact with other turtles. We often thought that turtles were not social animals, but the footages are showing us wrong. We actually have seen several turtles interacting with turtles of the same species and also different species. So this is two green turtles being friends. It's very cute. However, we have also recorded several turtles interacting with vessels. So you see this turtle coming up for air and seeing a boat and quickly swimming away to encounter the anchor of that boat and then getting stressed. So the video from the cameras provided a lot of insights into the behavior of turtles. But one thing that it didn't provide was data, right? I'm a scientist, I'm interested in numbers. So we decided to go high tech, and we started deploying what we call the CAT-SCAN. So it's a customized animal tracking device, which is basically a camera with lots of sensors that provides information on the pitch, roll, heading, depth, received underwater sound, temperature, and location of the turtles. And also, those allow us to have deployments for more than 24 hours. So to date, we have conducted 24 deployments. 5 of them have been for 4 hours and 19 for 24 hours. So you can only imagine the amount of data and information that this is providing us. So here's another video from one of those deployments, and unfortunately, we have also noticed a lot of interactions with vessels. So what we're doing now is using the timestamp from the videos with the data from the sensors to get a better sense on the fine scale behavior change of turtles when they're interacting with vessels. So I promise I won't show you a lot of data, but I just wanted to give you an example of the sort of data that we're collecting from the deployments that we are conducting. So basically on panel A, we have the dive profile of turtles. On panel B, we have the dynamic body acceleration, which is a proxy for energy expenditure. And on panel C, we have the rotation activity of turtles, which gives you a sense of the direction. We also get information from the hydrophones in panel D, which provides information on the sound that sea turtles are perceiving. So this is really cool because it also allows us to identify when boats are passing close to turtles. So now we can use this information to get more insights into how the sea turtles are changing their behavior when they're interacting with vessels. And we are still analyzing this data, but we have started to see that sea turtles are spending a lot of more energy because they're trying to escape from vessels. And this obviously has implications for their foraging ecology and also their growth and reproduction. So just looking at some preliminary data, here we compare the dive behavior of turtles during the scallop season and outside the scallop season. And basically what we found is that turtles are diving, they have less dives per hour during the scallop season, and they have longer, deeper, and further dives during the scallop season. So basically this is an adaptive response from turtles trying to get away from boats. So as part of understanding the impacts of vessels on turtles, we are also interested in understanding the human dimensions of interactions between turtles and vessels. So we're not managing for turtles, we're managing humans, right? They are causing some of those impacts. So some of the work that we have been doing in the lab has been focused on understanding what are boaters' perceptions to strategies and their willingness to change their behavior. And also we're interested in understanding how boaters' behaviors are affected by management decisions and how management decisions are affecting boaters. So I have been working with various managers, researchers, and law enforcement groups to identify the challenges and opportunities related to potential interventions to reduce sea turtle vessel strikes in Florida. So the information from this working group was incorporated into a survey which was conducted with the boating community at St. Lucie Inlet in the East Coast to investigate how the community would respond to different management interventions to reduce impacts on sea turtles. So basically what we found with this work is that the community would be most supportive of go-slow zones, and that they would have greater support if interventions were voluntary and if they overlapped with existing interventions or added minimal new restrictions, which is not a surprise. We also found that vessel modifications would be the least feasible intervention, and that managers should consider the cost, logistics, and legality of enforcing such intervention. But one interesting thing that came out of the study is that the community identified that more outreach is needed. And when they were talking about outreach, they're talking about not only more understanding of the impacts that vessels can have on sea turtles and other fauna, but also a better understanding of how any intervention would actually solve the problem. So if we are to implement a go-slow zone, what difference would that make? So obviously interactions between turtles and vessels are an issue, and hundreds of turtles are killed each year as a result of being hit by vessels. So you might be wondering what you can do to help. There's a few things, easy things that you can do. One, you can avoid boating over shallow seagrass areas. You can follow slow speed zones. You can use polarized sunglasses to better spot sea turtles. And if you do see a sea turtle, you can keep your distance and slow down. If by any chance you see an injured turtle or you happen to injure one, you can call Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation and they will assist you. So those are easy things that can be done to help mitigate some of the impacts from vessel interactions on sea turtles. So unfortunately, sea turtles are not only experiencing impacts on their foraging habitats, they also experience a lot of threats on their nesting grounds. So I want to remind you guys that you're a sea turtle, but this time you should channel your inner nesting female turtle. So I want you to think about a pristine nesting ground for sea turtles with natural dunes and native vegetation, in a location that provides suitable habitat for you to incubate your precious eggs. However, if you're nesting in the southeast United States, you're likely going to be faced with a developed coastline and exposed to associated pressures, such as those from artificial lighting, nesting obstruction, beach nourishment, coastal armoring, pollution, and human disturbance. And this is very problematic since it can jeopardize the quality of nesting areas, change the behavior of both adults and hatchlings, and it can influence the reproductive output and success of marine turtles. So even though coastal development and associated pressures can impact sea turtles, we have found that 80% of nesting areas in the United States are exposed to coastal development, with most of the very high and high density nesting areas being exposed to coastal development. So I don't know how well you can see this figure, but basically each square is a subpopulation of loggerhead turtle or a different species of turtles. And the different circles represent nesting grounds for that subpopulation or species, and the larger the circle, the more important that nesting area. Now the different colors here represent how exposed those nesting areas are to coastal development. So here we can start to see that there's some areas that are really important for turtles that are exposed to coastal development, and areas that are important for turtles that are not. So this information was actually used by Florida Wildlife Commission to identify areas to prioritize either conservation or intervention. So basically we identify areas that had high nesting density and had low exposure to coastal development, and these were areas that were good candidates for conservation and protection. We also identify areas that had high importance for sea turtles and were had high levels of exposure, and those areas were important or good candidates for intervention and targeted conservation. So in case you're interested, those were the locations that were identified, and they provided a starting point for FWC to consider areas to prioritize for conservation and management. So with increases in human populations, the availability of beaches without exposure to coastal development has been reduced and will likely continue to reduce into the future. So one of our earlier work looked at how coastal development and population growth will occur in coastal areas, and we looked how that would change at sea turtle nesting grounds. So basically, if you look at this map, the areas in orange are areas that are predicted to have an increase in coastal development and population. So obviously, a lot of the sea turtle nesting grounds in the future are going to be experiencing a lot more pressures from coastal development. So as development continues, it is important to understand the extent to which marine turtles can adapt to disturbances and the degree to which beaches can be developed sustainably while maintaining suitable nesting areas. And this is important because persistence of suitable nesting habitat for marine turtles is crucial for reproduction and recruitment into the population. Don't know if this video will play, but here I just wanted to highlight that further impacts to the suitability of sea turtle nesting grounds will continue to happen. Not only we're going to have increases in temperature, we're going to have increase in storm activities, sea level rise, and other processes that are going to continue to impact the nesting ground of sea turtles. So given the potential impacts of climate change on sea turtles and the concerns of how turtles will be impacted, there has been substantial amount of work investigating and predicting how climate change will impact turtles. So this figure here is from recent review on the knowledge basis of how sea turtles will be impacted by climate change. And it basically identified that most of the work on sea turtles and climate change focus on how increasing temperature will affect the sex ratio and the hatchlings of sea turtles. And the reason for this is because temperature plays a vital role on sea turtle embryo development, hatchling success, and sex ratio. So in order for sea turtle eggs to successfully incubate, they need to incubate within a narrow temperature range. Anything above or below this will cause the eggs not to develop and die. Sea turtles also have temperature-dependent sex determination, and this means that the sex of the hatchlings is determined by sand temperature. So warmer temperatures will have more females, and cooler temperatures will have more males being produced. So to better understand the potential impacts of increasing temperature on sea turtles, I have been monitoring the thermal profile or the temperature of sea turtle nesting grounds for many years. I have also developed and used microclimate and correlative models to predict what the send temperature will be like at sea turtle nesting grounds. And I have used information on the relationship between the sex of hatchlings, their reproductive output and temperature to predict what will happen in the future. So my work and the work of several other researchers have predicted that we have a feminization of sea turtle population as climate change progresses. And this is what I call the bachelor's paradise. We're actually going to have a lot of female turtles to only a few males. So we don't really know what this means, really. We know that more females will increase the number of eggs, and this will likely increase cause of population growth. But the problem will be in the long term when we don't have a lot of male turtles being produced. So one of the main standing questions in my field is how many male turtles do we need to sustain a sea turtle population? Do we need to have one male for each 10 females? Do we need to have 2 males for every 50 females? So we don't really know this, and it seems like it's one of the key questions that needs to be addressed for us to better understand the impacts of climate change on sea turtles. So this is actually a research question that we're trying to address now with funding from the National Science Foundation and collaborators from UMass and Oregon State University. And to address this question, we're working in an island off the northeast coast of Brazil called Fernando de Noronha. And the reason why we're working in this location is because we actually have access to all the different life stages of sea turtles for this population within this area. So not only we have access to nesting females and their hatchlings, but also we know where the males and the females are breeding. So we're able to collect information in the different life stages of turtles. So to address this question, we're undertaking a multifaceted approach, and basically we're putting satellite tags on the back of the males to get a better sense of how often they're mating and when they're mating. We're also collecting information on the reproduction of females. We're conducting in-water surveys to look at the proportion of males and females that are within the breeding area. And we're collecting data on the genetic fingerprinting to determine paternity and the contribution of male and females to the cohort of turtles that are being produced. So basically we're putting all this information into a model, a population model, and this will help us identify how many males we need to sustain sea turtle populations. We're still in the process of answering this question, but hopefully by the time we have the results, we'll be able to better understand the impacts that climate change can have on sea turtles. So as part of exploring the impacts of climate change on sea turtles, it is also important to explore their capacity to adapt to climatic changes. As we know, sea turtles have been around for millions of years, and during this time they have persisted to dramatic changes in climate, demonstrating to have the capacity to adapt to climate change. So the big question now is whether depleted population of sea turtles can adapt to faster changes in our climate. So it's being suggested that sea turtles might adapt to climate change by shifting their nesting distribution to areas that are more suitable. They might change where they lay the eggs within the nesting beach, and they might also start nesting earlier to align with cooler temperatures. And this is something that we are already observing in Florida. Oops. So to better understand whether sea turtles can adapt to climate change and whether their adaptive responses will be sufficient to counteract impacts from climate change, we basically looked at the sex ratio of hatchlings that are being produced across different nesting grounds globally for different species of turtles. So each dot represents a nesting area, and the pie chart represents proportion of females being produced. So basically in black, we have the proportion of females that are currently being produced in each location. In red, we have the predicted proportion of females that will be produced in a future climate. And in blue, we have the proportion of females that will be produced if sea turtles actually change the timing of their nesting. So basically what we found with this study is that only 4 sites will be able to maintain current sex ratio. So obviously, even if sea turtles adapt by nesting in different times of the year, this would not be sufficient for them to maintain the same productivity of hatchlings that they have now. And this will have implications for sea turtle populations. So I have also been interested in exploring the potential implications from turtles shifting their nesting grounds to areas that are more suitable as climate change progresses. So some of our earlier work looked at the suitability of sea turtle nesting grounds currently, and on the panel D, E, and F, we looked at suitability in a future climate. We then identify areas that would be climatically suitable, and we looked at the impacts of sea level rise and coastal development in those regions. So we obviously found that there will be declines in climatically suitable nesting grounds, and that loggerheads will experience the highest decrease in habitat suitability, followed by green turtles and leatherback turtles. We also found that 78% of the beach habitat that is predicted to be climatically suitable will likely be inundated by sea level rise. And to make this even worse, coastal development will hinder potential adaptation of sea turtles. So let's see if this will play. Daniel, can you? Yeah. Yes, thank you, Daniel. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's several climatic processes that will impact the incubating environment of sea turtles. But we also have to remember that there is other anthropogenic stressors occurring at the same time. So really we have to start thinking about the synergies between stressors and their cumulative nature. So if you are a sea turtle, you face multiple stressors across all of your life stages, which will have substantial implications to population stability. So luckily, there are many things that we can do to help. We can increase the resilience of turtles and reduce the stressors that they're facing. And this can easily be done by using turtle-friendly lights, cleaning the beach, leaving no trace, reducing marine debris, choosing responsibly caught seafood, and also reducing the impacts of climate change. So I don't want this presentation to be all doom and gloom. Some species of sea turtles and populations are certainly doing well and going in the right direction. And this is the case for green turtles nesting in Florida. So if you look at this graph here, you can see that in the 1990s, we had less than 5,000 green turtle nests, and now we have over 25 turtle nests during a nesting season. And this is basically a result of conservation measures that were undertaken 20, 30 years ago, because that's how long it takes for sea turtles to reach sexual maturity and nest again. So even though the outlook is positive for green turtles in Florida, we can't get too caught up on this, as we need to think about the productivity of hatchlings. Not only is it important to have nests, it's important that those nests are producing hatchlings as well. And because there's a lot of different stressors impacting the nests, the productivity that we're having from each nest is not very high, or they're decreasing. So we really have to better understand the impacts that nests are experiencing and make sure that we can use science-based solutions to reduce those threats. And this will ensure that populations will continue to grow in the next 20 to 30 years. So other species in Florida, like the loggerhead turtles, they're not doing as well as green turtles. So basically, if you look at this graph here, you can see that the population is sort of stable. There's no increase or decline in the trends of nest. So particularly for species or populations which trends are not increasing, we need to make sure that we understand how different stressors are impacting the species and inform the current and future management. So this way, next time you ask to channel your inner sea turtle again, you're not worried about the future, what the future might bring. And hopefully sea turtles will be able to have a less stressful existence. So with this, I'll leave this video, and I believe we have time for questions.
One of your slides, you had predicted change in coastal development. You know, a lot of Florida was warned to be increasing. There were distinct blue slivers throughout. Is that because lands were purchased for conservation and now they're permanently protected, or I can't figure out why would known development decrease, or would we think it decrease in that area?
So it's basically the number is relative to population growth, so also has to do with capacity of those areas expanding in the future. So there's a lot of different factors that went in. I didn't really develop that layer, someone else did, but yeah, it's a combination of areas that are protected now and also the capacity of those areas to grow in the future.
On that last slide you had,
Can't move.
the number of nests, like, go up and down, so why is that?
So there's a lot of variability on the number of nests, and it really has to do with the ability of turtles to be able to nest on that particular year. So not every turtle nests every year. So usually this is for loggerheads, that graph is for loggerheads, they nest every 2 to 3 years. So it really depends on what's happening at their foraging areas and how ready they are to, I guess, reproduce. So there's a lot of fluctuations, like natural fluctuations.
Do you think that turtles actually are cognizant enough to, when they come up to breathe, look at the atmosphere with their eyes, when they see a moving boat versus a anchored boat, do they know the difference? And I've been fishing a lot along our coast, and I see turtles all the time.
Yeah, I'd like to think they're smarter than they are. I mean, with the footage that we have recorded, we see a lot of close calls. And I would think that they would hear the boats before it got that close, right? And they would react. But some turtles react differently. Some are faster, some are more responsive. So there's a little bit of variation. And I think turtles do get used to having boaters around. So in areas that they're used to having boats, they seem to respond differently. So I did a lot of work in the Bahamas, and I worked in an area that was very pristine, and the turtles were really like scared of people and boats, and it's very different than what I find here in Florida.
I have a question about what part of a turtle's life is spent close to the shore, either laying eggs, nesting. Do they spend most of their time out at sea?
So proportionally, they spend most time at foraging areas in shallow coastal areas, and then you basically have turtles after they hatch, the hatchlings. They go a little bit offshore for a few years, like 5 years, and then they find coastal areas, and they are there for until they reach sexual maturity and go to their nest breeding areas. That's 20, 30 years, and then they start nesting. So coastal areas are really important for turtles.
What about the overlap of protected areas with the manatees and the turtles?
So when we did our surveys, the general community, obviously, they alluded to the fact that we have a lot of protected areas for manatees, but turtles are not necessarily using the same areas. We will have to protect all the areas to really make a difference. There is some overlap, but it's not the overlap that we need to ensure that areas used by turtles are protected.
Well, hopefully the training of boaters in areas where there are turtles or manatees can be reciprocated. And
Yeah.
I guess you just have to be careful if you're in a boat, regardless of where you
Yes.
are.
We have some other questions?
What's the lifespan of the turtle?
That's a great question. We think about 80 to 100 years, but we don't really know because it's really hard to tell how old this turtle is. So if we capture a turtle in a boat, we really have no way of saying how old that turtle is. We can tell when turtles reach sexual maturity, and we have some different size classes that we can use to infer how old they are, but it's really hard to know when they're alive. We can sort of tell using some of their bones, but I would say 80 to 100 years, depending on the species. Yes.
How precisely do they return to breed after hatching?
That's a good question. It was asked how precisely turtles return to their nesting areas. So we know that turtles nest within the same region, right? So we actually do some nesting work at St. George Island, and we have seen turtles nesting there that have nested at St. Joe Bay, for example, or have nested near Sarasota. So they go to the same region. Some turtles are more, they have higher site fidelity than other turtles, but it's within, kilometers. And I guess the population that we have in the North Gulf of Mexico, they tend to use larger areas than other populations that tend to have more site fidelity. Yes. So let's say a turtle is ready to nest. They'll come up and they might nest 5 to 7 times during a year. And then it takes another 2 to 3 times for them to come back again. So the question is whether there's a species of turtle that is more social or more anxious. That's a good question. So when we work in Crystal River, we work with green camps and loggerhead turtles. And the loggerheads, they're sub-adults and adults, and the greens and the camps are juveniles. And to do our research, we have to catch the turtles. And we catch the turtles by doing what we call a rodeo technique. So basically, we follow the turtle, and then we jump on the turtle. We catch the turtle, and we bring the turtle to the boat. Don't try that at home, please. You need a permit. But the loggerheads, they're just sitting there because they're big, and they're basically daring us to catch them, and they're really heavy and hard to maneuver. The green turtles are super fast. They just go do the donuts, and you can never catch them. And the camps, they're just very beautiful, and they just swim, and it's easier to catch them. So I don't know if that's just specific to this location and the life stages of the turtles and what they're exposed to, but we find that the different species have different personalities as well.
Its predation on eggs in the nest increased now that we have coyotes everywhere. But I know you have places out here for you can hear the coyotes every night.
Yeah, predation is certainly an issue for sea turtle eggs, from anything from coyotes, fox, ghost crabs, birds sometimes. So it's obviously an issue. The one thing we have to think about when we think about impacts on sea turtles is the reproductive value of each life stages. So if you have, let's say, one egg being killed is not the same thing as one female being killed, because it takes a long time for those eggs to survive and reach sexual maturity. But nevertheless, you need those nests to hatch and hatchlings to be produced, right? To get to the point to reproduce as well. Yes.
I think as you do the research that you do, sort of addressing multiple, stretches of the turtle, I think anytime you catch one, you might argue this, but I think taking a small sample of blood, just to have a genotype or the freeze or genotype, whether it's part that's, I think as the climate warms and potentially does skew the sex ratio, there could be that population boom from having more females born, but then at some point you might start getting inbreeding depression because there's fewer fathers, more inbreeding, and it would be good to sort of track what the inbreeding level is once maybe the boom is busted, like when you sort of have decreases in budget over time. It'd be nice to have that sort of molecular data
Yeah, no, certainly, and we do collect 2 samples from each turtle, one for genetics and one for stable isotope to look at foraging ecology, so we do have that, if anyone wants to analyze.
How long did those cameras or transmitters last?
So the Paralens, which is like the GoPro, lasts 3 hours, and the CAT cam lasts 24 hours.
So it's not like they can swim for 6 months of their life and have you track them
No,
that
but
way.
the satellite tags, which just provides information on their location, can last for years.
Oh,
Yes.
What percentage of eggs do you usually maturity?
So the question was what proportion of eggs reach full maturity? So we say one egg or one hatchling in 1,000 make it. If you think about the different life stages and the different stressors, so if you think about, while the egg is incubating, there's several stressors, and then the eggs hatch, and then you have stressors or predators in the beach, and then when they reach the ocean, and then within the ocean, and then the different life stages. So it's not many turtles that reach sexual maturity, and that's why they raise so many clutches, because some of them will make it, and they have to ensure that happens. So the question if that's worse than it used to be, it's hard to say. I imagine so, because one of the big gaps that we have is survivorship for the different stages of sea turtles. But obviously they're experiencing more stressors, so they're likely to be being more impacted and have a lower survivorship rate. Yes, in the back.
And is there an observed age where turtles stop nesting, or like a stage in their life?
The question is if there was an observed age when turtles stop nesting. I would assume so, but it's really hard to know, because the only time we have access to those turtles is when they come to nest. And obviously we don't encounter all the turtles that are nesting, so it's hard to know when they stopped nesting. But I would assume at some point they would stop nesting. Further in the back.
So my question is that what's normally on a turtle's diet? How would things going in the ocean be similar to that?
Okay, so the question is related to turtles' diet and how similar are things going in the ocean to that. So different species of turtles eat different things and at different life stages as well. But basically, leatherbacks are eating jellyfish, which look like plastic bags floating in the ocean. Similarly, green turtles, even though they're herbivorous and they eat mainly plants, when they're juveniles, they'll eat jellyfish as well, which is similar to plastic. We have camps, loggerheads, olive ridleys, they eat mollusks, they eat crabs, and I guess the issue is also, with toxics and how other things that they're eating are filtering this polluted environment and how that's affecting them. But I forgot the number, but a high proportion of turtles that are stranded have plastic in their stomachs. I would say it's more than 70%. Yes. So one of the slides I had the stressors for sea turtles, and one was coastal armoring. Basically changes the habitat of turtles, right? It might reduce the nesting area, or it might change the morphology of the nesting area, and that might have implications for the suitability of the area for sea turtles.
I wanted to ask about Africa, the turtles around the coast of Africa. What turtles are there?
You have green turtles, loggerheads, leatherbacks, hawksbills. You have, I think, five of the 6 species.
So is there less pressure there than?
So the pressures are different, right? I guess one of the main stresses for sea turtles is commercial fisheries, and in some developing countries you have artisanal fisheries and recreational fisheries as well. That is harder to, I guess, manage. So that is a big issue. So it's hard to compare. There's some global assessments looking at different population and species of turtles and where they're doing better and worse. But yeah, they're not doing great. And the problem is we might protect sea turtles here in the US, but as soon as they cross the, 200-kilometer border, they go off into international waters, then they are facing other stressors. We have turtles, for example, that forage in the west coast, loggerheads in California. They go back all the way to Japan to nest. So they are migratory. So during that migration, they're facing a lot of different stressors. Yes.
How do you feel about people owning turtles as pets?
You mean sea turtles? Or like terrestrial turtles?
Like
freshwater?
Like, can people own sea turtles?
No, it's illegal. I need a permit just to have a dead turtle in my lab for educational purposes. So you're not allowed to take, keep, or handle turtles without a permit. Yes. So the question was what kind of training boaters we received about sea turtle threats. So one of the things that we're going to do before we develop the education campaign is to conduct survey with the communities to understand the demographics and understand their beliefs and understand what's the best message to hopefully change their behavior. So the locations that we work are very different. So we work in Destin, for example, where we have a lot of spring breaker, like more young generation coming, but we work also in St. Pete and Sarasota, and the demographics are different. So we're gonna tailor the message based on the communities using those areas. Yes.
How do lights affect the turtles'
How does what, sorry?
lights?
Oh, lights. Okay, that's a good question. So how does light affect turtles? So light affect turtles in different ways. The main impacts on hatchlings. So we have hatchling disorientation. So when hatchlings leave their nest, they follow the brightest light, and usually that's the horizon in the ocean or the moon. But if you have a bright light, let's say in a coastal area, sea turtles would follow that light and they'll get disorientated, and instead of going to the ocean, they'll go to buildings, to the road, and they would end up being killed. And that's why we use red lights and we use low lights in coastal areas to reduce impacts. And similarly, nesting females, they might also get disoriented when they see bright lights.
Do turtle extruders, or whatever they're called now, on trawlers and stuff, are they actually working or helping?
Yes, turtle excluded devices, they are deployed in the shrimp industry, and they do help. They certainly help. They reduce the bycatch. The problem is that not all fisheries have an enforcement, and not all boaters are using it, but if it's used, it certainly makes a difference.
Okay, I think we can give you a rest a little bit. Thank you very much. And thank you for not only having such interesting videos and photographs, but the data was very easy to understand, so I appreciate that. All right, so this is the second of a four event series, and so next month we'll have someone coming, Dr. David Blackburn, coming from University of Florida Museum of Natural History, and he's an herpetologist. He specializes in turtle. No, you're the turtle person. He specializes in frogs. So we'll get to hear about evolution of different frogs and documenting the data on that. But Alan Hanstein, the executive director of the Challenger Center, wanted me to mention that next Thursday night is a free presentation by Marshall Shepard, and he has 3 degrees from FSU, but he's a pretty well-regarded climate scientist, and he'll be down here at 7 o'clock next Thursday. So put that on your calendar. You can also look at the Challenger website for more specific information about his background. So thank you all so much for coming. It was nice to have a lot of new faces, a lot of students here tonight, so that was great. Wonderful questions. Thank you.
You enjoy the presentation, Dad?